When AEW first launched in 2019, it was seen as a true alternative. Finally, a second major platform for wrestlers who are tired of the WWE machine. Or so we thought. Over the last 5 years, we've seen former world champions, rising stars, female wrestlers, and even Hall of Famers who made their name in WWE jump ship to AEW in search for a fresh start. While some of them would go on to win world titles, main event pay-per-views, and become bigger stars than ever, but for most, it ended up being a situation similar to, if not worse, than their WWE run. In fact, after studying the careers of almost a dozen ex-WWE stars, I've noticed there's one common pattern that's been quite obvious over the last 3 years for every single former WWE star who signed with AEW. So grab your popcorn and take your vitamins, because in this video, we're going to do a deep dive into what happened to every big WWE star who signed with AEW. Starting off, we have none other than Cole's time in WWE saw him dominate the scene in NXT alongside the Undisputed Era. Cole would win the North American title, the tag team titles, the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic, as well as hold the NXT title for over 400 days, solidifying himself as one of the greatest champions of NXT. After leaving WWE in August 2021, Cole would make his debut for AEW at All Out to a thunderous ovation from the crowd, along with another WWE star, who we'll talk about later in this video. After his debut, it seemed like Cole was destined for big things. After all, he had all his friends from the Elite and even his girlfriend Britt Baker in the company. But somewhere along the line, things didn't turn out the way fans expected. While Cole would have some high-profile matches challenging for the AEW World title and even main eventing the biggest show in AEW history, Cole's time in AEW has been riddled with injuries, inconsistent booking, and failed attempts at trying to recreate the magic of the Undisputed Era. The Devil storyline, in particular with MJF, was Cole's longest run in the main event scene of AEW, but failed to reach a satisfying ending. Cole's feud with Jericho didn't deliver, and his run in AEW so far has failed to live up to the heights he reached in NXT. Another wrestler who debuted on the same night as Adam Cole in AEW was Bryan Danielson. When Danielson arrived in AEW, the hype was insane. He would have an instant classic against Kenny Omega at AEW Grand Slam 2021 and would even go on to challenge then AEW World Champion Hangman Page for the title at Winter is Coming. Soon after, Bryan would join the Blackpool Combat Club and be a mainstay of AEW programming. Bryan would often be seen in top matches against the likes of MJF or multi-man tag matches as part of the Blackpool Combat Club. But Bryan's real moment of glory in AEW came when he challenged Swerve Strickland at All In for the AEW World Championship with his career on the line. Bryan would go on to win the match and hold the title for 48 days before being dethroned by another Blackpool Combat Club member, Jon Moxley. Now let's be honest, no matter how talented or beloved Bryan is, there was no way we were getting a WrestleMania 30 Yes Movement type run from Bryan in AEW, but his time in AEW has been relatively better than most ex-WWE stars. He has had dream matches against the likes of Okada, Omega, and Ospreay. He's competed in the Continental Classic, the Owen Hart Tournament, and Bryan just seemed to have fun doing what he loves. Definitely a success story in my book. But the same can't be said about the next wrestler on our list, the man formerly known as Rusev, who now goes by Miro. Rusev's time in WWE saw him feud against the likes of John Cena, Roman Reigns, Randy Orton, and even hold the US title not once, not twice, but 3 times. But no matter how dominant he was, he always seemed to remain stuck in the mid-card or in comedy acts. So when Rusev arrived in AEW, fans thought this would finally be the moment when Miro is finally booked as a monster heel and gets a run at the top of the card. And for a time, things seemed to be going in that direction. He won the TNT title against Darby Allin, defended it successfully against the likes of Eddie Kingston, but once Miro lost the title, it all just went downhill. After a 6-month hiatus due to injury, Miro would return to AEW and get thrown into random multi-man matches before another long absence. When Miro finally made his return in May of 2023, he got into a feud involving his wife CJ Perry and Andrade, only to go on another long hiatus to recover from an injury. Miro would eventually leave the company in February 2025, having wrestled only 11 matches in the almost 4-year run, leaving fans wondering what actually went wrong. Was it miscommunication? Was it just the injuries? Was it backstage politics? A combination of all three? Something really went wrong with Miro's run in AEW, but hey, who knows? Maybe we'll see him return to WWE and make every day Rusev Day again. But if you think Miro had it bad in AEW, wait till you hear about the next wrestler on our list. Malakai Black arrived in AEW in July 2021 and would instantly be positioned as a big deal. He would enter a feud with Cody Rhodes, defeating the American Nightmare not once but on 2 occasions. But the craziest part is that this was perhaps the highest point of Black's entire 4-year AEW run. Black, who had made a huge impact in NXT, holding the NXT title for over 100 days and having notable feuds against the likes of Johnny Gargano, Adam Cole, and Velveteen Dream, simply couldn't find his footing on WWE's main roster. So, when Black debuted in AEW, it seemed like this was finally going to be the long overdue singles run on a big stage. But what happened instead was Black formed his stable going by the House of Black, which often saw him competing in trios matches and rarely any singles matches. Sure, the House of Black held the trios titles and had some memorable matches against the Elite, but in the long run, Black's booking in AEW was just confusing. I mean, you have this guy who can put on bangers in the ring, cut promos, he's got the aura, but you waste his entire run in a trios act. Black's contract with AEW expired in February 2025, and with Triple H now in charge of creative in WWE, maybe we'll see Black return to WWE and finally get the main roster run he deserves. Another WWE star who had a hype debut followed by a disappointing run was none other than Saraya. After Saraya arrived in AEW and announced that she was going to wrestle for the first time in 5 years, the wrestling world was buzzing. And her first match against Britt Baker, though a bit sloppy at times, was quite emotional, especially to see her in the ring again after the career-threatening neck injury. But soon after, Saraya would become just another face on the roster. She would form the Outcast with Toni Storm and Ruby Soho, and though the Outcast got regular TV time, their booking was lazy and barely got any reaction from the fans. Though Saraya won the AEW Women's World title in her home country at All In, it felt less like a major moment and more like an obligatory feel-good moment to send the home country fans happy. After losing the title just a few weeks later, Saraya would be featured on and off on AEW TV, mostly on Rampage, barely making an impact. If you've noticed, there seems to be a common pattern here with ex-WWE stars who sign with AEW. They get all the hype in their debut, being touted as a game-changer. The hype dies down by the next PPV. They get lost in the shuffle of the roster or delegated to Rampage and are barely featured. It feels like Tony Khan has too many toys to play with and doesn't know how to utilize them all effectively. Another wrestler who fell prey to the same pattern is Keith Lee. Having held the NXT title and NXT North American title in WWE, you'd think Keith Lee would be someone AEW would build around. But Keith Lee's entire run in AEW has seen him get paired with random tag team partners, and even his storyline with Swerve Strickland didn't have a satisfying conclusion. In January 2024, Lee underwent double surgeries and has been on hiatus ever since, with the most memorable moment of Keith Lee's AEW run still being this tweet for all the wrong reasons. Speaking of Swerve Strickland, this is someone we can all agree has had a better run in AEW than in WWE. He's had bangers against the likes of Darby, Hangman, Bryan Danielson, but Swerve's defining moment with AEW came when he defeated Samoa Joe to become the first African-American AEW World Champion. Swerve would go on to hold the title for over 100 days, defending against the likes of Christian Cage and Will Ospreay before losing it to Bryan Danielson at All In. This reign truly cemented Swerve as a main event star and someone who can be the top star for any wrestling company. But perhaps the wrestler who has had the most success in AEW among all the ex-WWE wrestlers is none other than Jon Moxley. Now, don't get me wrong, Moxley was already a big deal in WWE as Dean Ambrose, but he was never pushed as the guy. He was always second fiddle to Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins or stuck in comedy acts. But when Mox made his debut for AEW at the inaugural Double or Nothing attacking Kenny Omega, you knew the time for fun and games was over. Over the years, Mox would establish himself as one of the top pillars of AEW, carrying the company through tough times, be it during the pandemic or after the CM Punk Brawlout incident. As a part of the Blackpool Combat Club, Mox would participate in violent encounters and also wrestle in promotions like New Japan and GCW. Having won the AEW World title 4 times, you can truly say that Tony Khan sees Moxley as someone he can rely on, though his current reign hasn't lived up to the standards of his previous ones. Another former WWE World Champion who has had a lengthy run in AEW is Chris Jericho. Jericho has been with AEW since the very start, even becoming the inaugural AEW champion. Through his time in AEW, Jericho has been a mainstay on TV, be it with the Jericho Appreciation Society, the Inner Circle, or as the Learning Tree, though it's hard to say if any of them has been particularly eventful. A common pattern you see is Jericho getting in feuds with any name that starts to get momentum. Be it Ricky Starks, Action Andretti, or a returning Adam Cole, it's almost like a rite of passage to face Jericho. Fans have even noticed this, calling it the Jericho Vortex, with chants of please retire, and the negative reaction with audiences growing stronger. You see, a reason Jericho has been able to sustain his career for almost 3 decades is his ability to disappear and reinvent himself every time he returns. But after having been on AEW TV almost consistently for 4 years now, fans are starting to get tired of the Learning Tree, as his formula is becoming quite predictable. But something that was not super predictable was Adam Copeland signing with AEW. You just thought this guy was going to be a WWE lifer, especially after that shocking return at the Royal Rumble and because he was a Hall of Famer, but after making his AEW debut at Wrestle Dream, Cope would immediately enter a feud with former best friend Christian Cage for the TNT title. The feud was low-key fire, and Cope would go on to win the TNT title and have some solid matches against the likes of Brody King, Penta, and even former protege Matt Cardona. But just like Jericho, overexposure might have caused Copeland to lose some of his aura. Because whenever you heard this in WWE,
you think you know me.
You just knew it was special. You just knew something big was about to go down. But in AEW, he just feels like just another name on the roster. At Double or Nothing, Cope would suffer a fractured tibia after jumping off the cage in a TNT title match, forcing him to vacate the title. After his return from hiatus, Cope would get into a feud with Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship, which has not been a super hit with the fans. But something that has been a super hit among the fans is Cope's best friend Christian Cage's run in AEW. Now, this man was already a legend in WWE, though he never got the proper main event push he deserved. But after Christian Cage arrived in AEW, he just took it to a whole another level. Turning into Father of the Year, Christian just went full unhinged and became an absolute menace. He has held the TNT title, he has challenged for the AEW World title, and the way things are going, nobody should be surprised if we finally get the much-deserved Christian Cage AEW World title run in 2025. But a former WWE World Champion who never won the World title in AEW or even came close to it was Jeff Hardy. Sure, Hardy had some cool moments in AEW like his match against Darby Allin or his debut where he spent a good 20 seconds dancing on the ramp before making the save for his brother Matt. But throughout most of his run in AEW, Jeff was seen either in tag team matches or getting thrown into random programs against the likes of Jeff Jarrett. And a lot of it had to do with injuries and Jeff just being super unreliable, getting into DUI incidents, and sabotaging any chances of a meaningful push. After his contract expired in June 2024, Hardy signed with TNA, where he would win the tag titles with brother Matt at Bound for Glory. And now with the NXT and TNA collab, chances are high that we get one final Hardy Boys run in the WWE. On the topic of tag titles, when Sasha Banks left WWE by handing over the women's tag titles, fans were unsure if they would ever see the boss back inside a wrestling ring. But after competing in a couple of dream matches in Japan, Mercedes Mone arrived in AEW in March 2024 on a special episode of AEW Dynamite titled Big Business. Since then, she has won the TBS title, feuded against the likes of Willow, Britt Baker, Chris Statlander, but many fans would call her run with AEW so far underwhelming, and it has less to do with her performance and more to do with how she's been booked. Sure, there's still a special presence and aura around the CEO, but it simply doesn't compare to the impact and standard she set in WWE or even during her time in NXT. Something just feels off about her booking in AEW, or even take someone like Bobby Lashley for example. Just like every other WWE signing, the hype was massive when Bobby arrived, but now, he's just another name on the roster. Sure, he's holding the tag titles, he's feuding with Swerve, but there's just something with AEW's booking that in a way takes away the special aura of these stars just a week or two after their debut. But this conversation wouldn't be complete without mentioning the one name you've all been waiting for, the biggest former WWE star to sign with AEW, a former WWE World Champion who had an iconic reign, Jack Swagger. When CM Punk made his return to wrestling after almost 8 years, it was a major dub for AEW. Punk's return brought in new eyeballs and even mainstream attention to the company. Fans who had stopped watching pro wrestling for years started tuning into AEW Dynamite just to get a glimpse of the best in the world. And while Punk had memorable feuds and matches against the likes of MJF, Eddie Kingston, and even won the AEW World title, the backstage drama far outweighed the in-ring stories. The butterfly effect set in motion by Punk's backstage fight with Jack Perry at All In will go down as one of the biggest turning points in wrestling history. While Punk would come back to WWE to a warm welcome, AEW is still recovering from the chaos the Second City Saint left them in. And while AEW has managed to do a solid job with the likes of Bryan Danielson, Christian Cage, Jon Moxley, but for most of the ex-WWE stars who signed with AEW, it just seems like a downgrade. But what do you think? Which ex-WWE star has had the best run in AEW? And do you notice the same pattern with AEW's booking? Let me know in the comments, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.